Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight we have the pleasure of being joined by the incredible Raven Reeves as we venture into these haunted houses. So get comfortable, grab your EMF meter, and let the darkness take control. Last year, I was cycling in Tuscany on holiday. I knew the guy who ran it, as it was my coach who also runs a national race team. We're a close-knit bunch on the holiday, as most people know each other from riding together back home. Later in our trip, the coach is talking about something strange that happened to him the night before. I didn't hear him at the time, as I was using the climbs as training and pushing on. We stop for lunch and he starts talking about his experience, and I ask him what he's talking about. He goes on to explain that he was asleep, and then all of a sudden he starts hearing talking, but just a little bit, as he thinks that it's very weird, as he's alone in that part of the villa, as it's a massive place that's been split into apartments. And he sits up and then gets pushed back down. In the morning he calls his wife back home, and she said she'd felt something when she was out there with him earlier that week, like she was being watched. Now on hearing this I started mocking him, and back at the villa I carry it on. So 2 nights later it's still a topic for jokes. We go to bed and I crash. Then at 2 AM I wake up and can't sleep, so I just lay there. Then I hear talking and think that it's my mate in the room next door who I'm sharing the apartment with, just talking to his wife back home in England. So I think nothing of it. About 30 minutes later, I'm tossing and turning when out of nowhere I feel like my head is being pushed into the pillow, and someone is holding my shoulder down as well. I was freaking out. It stops seconds later, but feels longer, and as it stops I hear a laugh, and I didn't sleep again that night. I told him in the morning what happened, and he thought I was winding him up. We've since found out that the villa has a history of things happening. Also, his apartment and mine are joined by a door. The rest are completely separate. We're back there again next month. I won't be mocking anyone though, as I don't want karma to take effect.
Most of these stories took place between 6 and 10 years ago. To begin, this is at one of my close friends' house in the middle of Tennessee. Many family members of his have lived there since the incident, and all recall very weird things going on throughout the years. I'll start with my experiences, which took place after some of the other stories I'll tell you about. I was at a friend's house one night, hanging out. I passed out on the couch watching TV. When I woke up, I realized that I needed to go home because I had to work early in the morning. I noticed that my friend who owned the house, I'll refer to him as JL from here on out, was in his room with the door shut and the light on. I got up and told him that I was leaving because I had to work. Through the door, he said, "Yup, see ya." I then went to the fridge to grab my drink and walked back by the door and said, "See you later." He replied, "Yup," but something didn't seem legit. It didn't really sound like him. So I opened the door. No one was in there. In fact, no one was in the house at all. I called his cell, and he said that he had left to go to McDonald's about 10 to 15 minutes prior. I freaked out and bolted out the front door. I sat on his front porch until he got home a few minutes later. I told him what happened, and he started telling me about the house. Apparently, quite a few years earlier, there was a family that lived there and had a few kids. One of those kids, at a relatively young age, hanged himself in the upstairs of the house. He then began to tell me his stories and that of his family. JL's brother used to live there before JL did, and apparently his now ex-wife was very into black magic. She did the rituals in the living room from time to time. One of the stories I was told from him was that they once saw a tall, skinny woman with long black hair, red eyes, and claws for hands. Apparently, she didn't like the wife because she kept showing herself to her with a scarier appearance each time. They believe the reason that they had 5 miscarriages was due to something she did to piss the spirit off. On more than one of the miscarriages, the wife awoke with sharp pains in her stomach and bad scratch marks around her throat and across her stomach. I was told that spirit, in some way or fashion, made it known that she liked the husband and would go crazy if the wife and husband slept in the same bed. Things would fly across the room, doors would open and shut randomly, and so on. When they slept in separate rooms, everything was fine. Well, finally, one day, the husband and wife decided to have a priest come over and check things out. The priest entered the front door, and it slammed shut behind him. I was told he noticed some of the black magic items that she used on the mantle. He immediately turned pale white and told them that they're on their own because of what she had been doing in the house. There was nothing he could do to help them. He left and never again returned any of their phone calls. The husband eventually developed a bad cocaine habit, and the two split up and moved out of the house. That's when JL moved in. The husband also told me that when he moved into his new house down the block, the same spirit followed him to that house and showed herself to him a number of times. But he stated that she wasn't dark or demonic, more like a random spirit just wanting to hang out. He later moved out of the country. He straightened out his life, and a few years ago he was actually in training to become a priest. So back to the original house that my friend JL moved into after his brother moved out. He always knew of the stories, but didn't believe in that sort of thing and didn't think much about it. It didn't take long before he changed his mind. JL said that after a few weeks of moving in, weird things started to happen. Banging on the walls when just he was there. Voices saying his name and things randomly moving from place to place about the house. His girlfriend moved in, and immediately she started to notice things too. One particular story that stands out was that one time she was taking a bath and she turned on the radio sitting on the sink. All of a sudden, the radio turned off. She turned it back up. It went back off. She turned it back up again, and it stayed on for a minute. She closed her eyes and laid there, and then she said she heard someone whisper, "Turn it down," in a quiet, stern voice. She opened her eyes, and there stood a young man with dark, wavy hair and glasses. She sat up in the tub quickly, and he vanished. Just like that. No one else was home. She freaked out and grabbed some clothes and bolted to a friend's house. Later that day, when she told JL what had happened, he called his brother and described what had happened to him. His brother told him to go across the street and talk to the old man that lived there and tell him everything that they had just experienced. JL did as he was told, and as he was describing the young man that his girlfriend had seen, the old man abruptly walked away and grabbed an old picture from the living room and showed it to them. The girlfriend broke into tears and said that that was the exact guy she saw. The old man told them that the picture was his brother, who had hanged himself in the upstairs of that house many years ago. Another story of mine, JL, myself, and another friend were hanging out in his living room. We decided we were going to stay the night because we lived a little ways away. JL went into his room and shut the door to go to bed. I was on one couch and my friend was on the other. As we lay there, all of a sudden it sounded like someone had dropped a bowling ball from the top step of the stairs. After JL learned of the suicide, he always kept the door leading upstairs shut, with things in front of it. No one ever went up there, and a lot of his brother's things were left there after the divorce. We heard whatever it was bang loudly down the steps, until the upstairs door flew open and crashed into the wall behind it, moving all of the stuff that was in front of the door out of the way. We were shocked and just looking at each other with blank faces. JL came out of his room in a fury and said, "What the F are you guys doing? I'm trying to sleep." He saw our faces and instantly knew that it wasn't us who had made the noise. We both pointed at the upstairs door. He nervously went and shut the door and yelled, "I wish you would leave me alone." It was eerie but calm the rest of the night. I was scared, I won't lie. I didn't sleep, and neither did my friend. Another time, we were there watching TV and partying one night. There were quite a few of us friends there. JL had pictures and vases on the mantel for decoration. As we all sat there drinking and whatnot, out of nowhere, one of the glass vases flew off the mantel and shattered on the wall behind me, nearly hitting me. I wigged out bad. Shortly after, we all left and went to a bar instead, where at least we could see the people throwing stuff at us. I haven't been back to the house since, and that was probably over 4 years ago. I haven't talked to JL for about a year or more. I moved a few hours away until about 2 or 3 days ago when we got in contact with each other. We started talking about some of the crazy things that happened there, and he told me a few new stories. He still lives there with his new girlfriend and his son. He went through some rough times and moved his son and himself in with his mom for a little while and went back to the house a couple of years ago. This was a really old house, and JL had learned that it had lead paint covering the walls, and he wanted to make it okay for his son to live in, so he decided to remodel, including the upstairs. They got all the furniture and stuff out and started scraping the paint, using respirators of course, and decided to knock a few walls out to make more room. Upon doing so, as they were knocking out a wall in the back, JL noticed a man standing there, just staring at him and shaking his head. He took his respirator off, and the man was gone. While remodeling the upstairs and moving all of his brother's stuff out, he noticed that it sounded like people were walking on the roof, which to him was great, since he had told his new girlfriend to call a roof guy to give an estimate on shingles, except when he went outside to meet them, no one was there. Many people at the house that day witnessed this. He says from time to time he still hears his name being called from the other room. One day, his 6-year-old son was watching TV, and they heard a woman calling JL's name. He looked at his son and said, "Did you hear that?" His son said, "Yes, Daddy." JL said, "Who did that sound like?" The son replied with the name of JL's current girlfriend. He got up and looked, and no one was there. Of course no one was there. He knew his girlfriend was at work. He said that happened a lot. He also remembered seeing the man that was shaking his head at him during the wall removal standing on the railroad tracks near the house as he walked outside one day. Again, he just stared, shaking his head, and vanished. That's all I can remember right now. I plan to go and visit my brother soon, as I haven't been to the house in a few years.
Out of high school, I worked at a cute little shop that sold gift baskets, goodies, and all sorts of home decor. This was before Big Box Hobby Lobby, and at the time, the store was one of the most popular places to go in town to get cute things for your house or great gifts for people. The store was actually located in one of the oldest houses in the area. All the stores around there were actually houses at one time, and it became this cute, quaint shopping area. For a long time after I started, none of the other workers discussed that the house/shop was haunted. I don't think they were purposefully keeping it from me, it just didn't come up. The shop/house was a 2-story, with a basement and attic as well. We always stayed open until 7:30 p.m. during the week, and there were always 2 closers for safety. When closing up, the front doors were locked to prevent any customers from coming in, and you can believe we locked that up on the dot so that we could clean up, balance the register, and get the heck out of there. There was a back door, but we kept that locked too, Those are the only two ways in and out of the house/store. On the night something happened to my friend Amanda and I, we were closing and the front door was locked up. We're cleaning, doing our thing as normal, and we're about to go, and had walked through the shop top to bottom, turning off all the lights, and we're standing at the back door, when out of nowhere, we heard the most evil laugh I've ever heard in my entire life. We both freak out, grab each other, and did the thing that you shouldn't do in every horror movie, which is run to the basement. In my defense, that's where the phone was. We ran back upstairs, busted out the back door and called the cops. We called the owners too. They showed up and cleared the place, and were more than understanding, and indicated they got calls to old houses all the time. The owner's husband shows up, and he was clearly perturbed at us for having called the cops, and said that we should have called him first, and that we're just a bunch of silly girls. However, he then begins to proceed to tell us a story about how when he was doing bookwork one evening in the basement, he heard voices upstairs. So he went up to investigate, thinking his wife and daughter had stopped by. He got up and the voices stopped. So he went back downstairs and got back to work. He said he then heard them again and returned to the upstairs part. And this time the conversation continued while he was standing there, and he himself skedaddled out of there. He never did tell us what he overheard specifically. Obviously, the story got out amongst the staff about our experience, and people started talking about theirs. Someone told us they saw jelly jars flying right off the shelf. Another co-worker told us she would be balancing the register and she could hear furniture upstairs being dragged back and forth, when the shop was totally devoid of customers, and her closing partner was in the back cleaning up. One of the managers told us that frequently when opening in the morning, she would go upstairs to turn on all the lights and would hear sounds of little girls playing in what would have been one of the house's bedrooms. The husband and wife would get very upset if you referred to what was going on in the house/shop as a haunting or a ghost. She was a woman of great faith, and she would always say that they were her angels. I can honestly say nothing further ever happened to me when I was working there, but it was totally creepy afterwards, especially to turn the lights off upstairs or having to go to the attic and/or basement. Follow up to this story, here I am almost 20 years later, and I live across the street from someone who now owns the building and has a different shop in it. The next time I catch her, I'm gonna try and not look crazy, and just ask her if she's experienced anything there.
I hate telling these stories because I convince myself that all of this isn't a coincidence, but a man has to procrastinate however he can, right? A little background. In April of 1997, my family moved from Portland, Oregon to a town in central Wisconsin of about 20,000. It was a significant upgrade in homes. My sisters and I thought the house was huge. We were 7, 5, and 3. I was the oldest. The reason we'd moved is because my dad, a Lutheran pastor, took a call at a church in a nearby town of about 500. The population of this place, I believe, has more than doubled since then. Anyway, we were pretty excited to live in what felt to us at the time like a rich person's house. Looking back, the stories I'm about to do my best to describe probably have something to do with why we could have afforded it. So we moved in and got all settled. The rooms were incredible. They were old and gigantic. As a child, the old wood floors in these large open bedrooms reminded me of ballroom dance floors. I'm not an art person, so that's the best way I can think of to describe them. All 3 of the bedrooms were on the 2nd floor of this 2-story house. It didn't take long before we started noticing things. My sisters would get up at night and ask to sleep on the floor of my parents' room. The house made noises, and we weren't accustomed to that sort of thing yet. Our dad would tell us the same thing all the time. We live in a 100-year-old house. No house this old is quiet. Of course, as pastors' kids, our immediate thought was always that it was Satan or one of his demons. We were convinced that the devil would come if he knew you believed in him and we were thinking about him. The Bible always said weird things like if you open the door to the idea of the devil, he may walk through it. So that amplified things for us as children. Eventually, we stopped believing that what we were hearing was normal creaking and cracking. The dog we had at the time was a very mild-mannered golden retriever. I had never seen him growl in his entire life, except for when he would do it playfully every once in a while, but this was different than that. A few months after we moved in, he started growling at corners and looking at us like, "Aren't you going to do something about this?" He would leave the room and we would hear him growling. So we'd go see what he was up to, and he'd be staring at the wall or weird things like that. Of the 3 dogs I've had in that house over the last 17 years, I don't live there anymore, but I work there during the summers and bring my dog. He was definitely the least troubled by the house. By now, getting close to 8 years old, I too would end up on the floor of my parents' room if I woke up in the middle of the night. Things were getting progressively weirder. Water faucets in the downstairs bathroom and the kitchen would have to be turned off in the middle of the night. My parents assumed my sisters or I were messing around. Eventually, though, it would happen while we were all on the floor in their room. My dad would turn them off. When we would wake up in the morning, the downstairs bathroom sink would be running again. One week it happened 3 times, and the last time, the door was locked. We started getting locked out of things a lot after this. As superstitious little kids, we were constantly convinced it was ghosts and demons just messing with us. Eventually, we wanted to know more about the house. After constant badgering, we managed to get my dad to go to the library and do some research. We didn't have internet yet, and he used those old-school machines in the library to do stuff. They weren't like normal computers. You researched old newspapers on them, town records, building blueprints, things like that. After working, my dad would go there and look things up. He went there for a few hours the first time. When he came back, he said, "Finding out some interesting stuff. Have some more things I'd like to check out tomorrow, though." He went there for a couple of hours the following 2 days as well. After the 3rd day, he came home and had an unsettling, almost excited look on his face. My mom said to him, "So, what'd you find out?" "Get the girls," I heard him say. "I've got some interesting stuff here." Looking back, I have no idea why he thought my 6- and 4-year-old sisters should know about this, or me for that matter, but he's just one of those kind of blunt people. He said it used to be the biggest house in the area, that it was an apple orchard, and that people had died on it. But only 3 of the deaths were suspicious. A mom died giving birth on October 19th, 19-something. This was my mom's birthday. The son she gave birth to killed himself when he was 19 on November 17th. That's my birthday. So I crapped my pants accordingly. I can't remember if the baby died and maybe the mom killed herself, but I know for a fact that the birthday stuff was correct. I had the birthday matching the death of one of the deceased, and she had the birthday of the other. Needless to say, things were pretty serious now. Serious enough that we ignored a lot of the random things for a long time. Eventually we got used to it. Around this time, I met a friend who we'll call Derek. Derek was convinced that his aunt frequently talked to her guardian angel. He also believed he had been visited by an entity in the woods while camping at his cabin one summer night. For the most part, Derek was an incredibly down-to-earth person. He had some social anxiety issues that didn't necessarily aid him in high school, but I always considered him quite brilliant. He would only tell me these stories after some serious persuasion. Derek didn't want people to know that he believed these things. He didn't even want to believe that he did. I only know that he had certain beliefs because of the way he responded to my stories when he came over to spend the night. He didn't really want me to talk about the house. It bothered him, but not in an I'm scared kind of way. More like a, dude, don't bring this up, let's just have a good night kind of way. Eventually I was offended and thought that he thought I was full of crap. So I went all in. I'm not making this stuff up. Screw you if you're gonna think I'm crazy. And that's when he decided to tell me about his stories. From that point on, he became the only friend that wasn't either in denial about our house or completely scared of it. So a few months after we realized that we both shared some unscientific beliefs, he came over to spend the night. We were 15, playing Grand Theft Auto San Andreas around 3:15 in the morning. We got tired and decided to call it a night. We participated in the usual sleepover whisper talks once the lights were off. After we were quiet for a minute, we heard what sounded like footsteps coming up the stairs. My bedroom was 12 feet past the top step, straight down the hall and on the left. I was feeling courageous and decided to get up. I turned on the lights, pushed my door open the rest of the way, and peered out into the hallway. There was nothing out there, except the basketball I had brought up the stairs earlier that night. I had set it in the corner by the bookshelf and left it there. Well, we must have spooked him, I said jokingly as I turned the lights off and got back into my bed. We continued to use this belittle the ghost strategy to ease our own nerves. Hey ghost, if you're gonna creep around in the middle of the night, we'd assume you wouldn't be such a wuss about it. I would say things like that jokingly. Damn, we got a Casper on our hands. Derek was cracking me up. If you're looking for food, we're out of ghost treats. The dog stole them off the table when we were putting the groceries away. The kitchen's downstairs though, if you're interested. We thought we were so tough. In hindsight, might not have been a great idea. Well, it responded to the last remark. The basketball started rolling. We saw its movement through the cracked door. We freaked out. I started curling up in my blankets, just barely peeking out from under them. He was hugging the bedpost. The basketball was rolling toward the stairs, past where we could keep an eye on it without moving further from our spots. We were silent for a good 30 seconds. Just before we were about to relax and turn on the lights and have a look, we heard a thump, 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 thump. The ball had bounced down the stairs and settled. The weirdest part about it, though, is that once it got down to the bottom of the steps, there were like 3 more quick dribbles, loud, forceful ones. A type of bouncing that gravity could not have been responsible for. We didn't see the ball go down the steps, but when I got the guts to go check it out, there it was, at the bottom. We didn't sleep much the rest of the night. Instead, we turned on the lights and played more Grand Theft Auto.
I moved to Prague in the Czech Republic to work as a private teacher after I figured that the labour situation was far from good in my home country of Belgium for recent graduates. My girlfriend and I are renting an apartment in Hradčanska. That area is fairly close from Prague Castle. It is a duplex located on the last floor of the building, which must be around 80 to 100 years old. However, the apartment where we live has only been inhabited for 20 years, since it used to be the attic of the building. We'd lived there for 5 months. It's quite modern and bright, nothing to be scared of. However, last month, I offered to keep the dog of one of my students, a lovely young fox terrier, only for 3 weeks while she was out of the country. I love dogs, but living on the 6th floor without elevators is a deal breaker for owning one permanently. The first night was terrible. The dog couldn't stop whining because it was so used to sleeping in the same bed as its owner, but that isn't too much of a thing. Mostly my girlfriend, in all honesty. To be able to get some sleep and reassure the dog, I went down and slept on the couch. The dog was silent for the rest of the night, and I woke up in the early hours at around 6 or 7. That's when I heard what I thought to be my girlfriend walking down the wooden stairs. I heard the cracking of wood and light steps going towards the couch. I was half awoken, but frankly felt that it was too early to show it and start conversation. That's when I felt her sitting on the couch and leaning on me, and when I decided it would be time to turn around and kiss her hello. It's an L-shaped sofa, and I was lying on the smaller part, but when I turned around, there was nothing. I listened intently and could hear her upstairs gently snoring. Obviously, I freaked because I have a history of sleep paralysis, and I hate it when it happens. And so I thought for the next day that was it. Sleep paralysis. I hate it, but at least I know it's nothing hostile. A few days later, my mum and my cousin came to visit us in Prague and spend Christmas holiday together. They slept on the same sofa, and I was really happy because the dog wouldn't whine anymore as it was not alone downstairs during the night. After their first night, we woke up, and my mum asked who went to the toilet in the early morning. I didn't, neither did my girlfriend, as far as she said. My mum then told me that in the early morning at around 6 or 7, she heard one of us go to the stairs, walk towards the bathroom, which is after the corridor between the couch and the entrance, and stop for a few seconds before the couch. She said she felt like she was being watched, just like I had before, but that it was a bit early to wake up and chat. It's only after we told her about my first experience that she became pale and asked if we were pulling her leg. We weren't. A few days pass, and my mum and cousin return to Belgium. My girlfriend goes to France to celebrate her mother's 50th birthday, and I decided, because I did not feel too courageous about being home alone after these experiences, to let the dog come up with me. 2 nights ago, I was sleeping on my stomach. The dog was by my side, and I again, in the early morning, heard someone either sighing or laughing lightly. I thought it might have been a sleep hallucination, but the dog got up, with its ears all pointy, as if they were trying to hear where the noise was coming from. The dog kept looking in the void towards the direction where I thought the noise had come from a few seconds prior. Now, the dog has returned to its family, and I'm home alone until Saturday. I have never wanted my girlfriend to be back more than now.
I've had my fair share of run-ins with the paranormal. My mother and I have always had the connection of being able to see things. My father, on the other hand, doesn't like to talk about it. I know he's seen things, but it scares him, so he pretends they aren't there. All of my life I've seen them. When I was a toddler, I lived with my grandparents. I used to see shadow people, which I referred to as ninjas. I also used to see what I would call the purple people. These figures would hide in the closets and the corners of the room most of the time. Their intention was to scare me, but they never harmed me. They also never moved. They would just stare at me. Several years later, I'm around the age of 7 or 8. I was having nightmares, so I crawled into bed with my parents in the upstairs bedroom. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up, and as I came to, I noticed something different. The entire room had changed. The dimensions of the room were the same, but all of the decor was different. It looked as if I was seeing the home, say, 100 years ago. Everything was aged and out of date, and I had an eerie feeling. I began opening and closing my eyes, trying not to believe what I was seeing. The room stayed this way for about 15 minutes or so. Eventually, I opened my eyes for what felt like the 1000th time, and everything was back to normal. In my great-grandmother's house, I used to see this man in one particular room of the house. He was always in the corner of the room. He was a tall, slender, dark-haired man. He looked human, but was a translucent, grayed-out figure. He was a fan of jump scares and could reorient his face in inhuman ways to make scary faces at me. Of course, this terrified me as a child. I would complain to my family and they would ask me to describe him. I did, and they told me that I had described my great-great-grandfather who died in that corner of that room. Apparently, he was a joker and he liked to prank people. When I was 10, my parents and I moved into a new home. It was a 100-year-old 2-story home that sat up on a big hill. We had moved our stuff in and settled down. A few months later, I had been playing with a pair of night vision goggles that I had suckered my mom into buying from Walmart. As cool as they were to me, they were just a pair of neon green glasses with a green light pointed out of the frames. But that is some nifty technology to a 10-year-old, right? So all the lights are off, and I decide to head down the hallway toward my parents' room. As I reached my parents' room, I looked in and saw my dad taking a nap. From the doorway, I'm looking at the side of the bed and seeing my dad laying horizontal. However, that's when I noticed the light from my goggles was hitting my dad and casting a shadow on the wall behind him. What I saw wasn't my dad's sleeping figure. Instead, I saw a perfectly outlined dark shadow of a little girl with 2 pigtails standing up vertically. I remember acknowledging what I saw, but not being scared. I just went on with myself, and I can't recall another memory of seeing this girl. From my recollection when I was younger, my experiences were never malicious. They may have been frightening, sure, but never harmful. When I was 12, my younger brother, who was 4, my mom, and myself went down the street to my aunt's house to babysit my new baby cousin while she ran some errands one night. I'm not sure what time it was, but it was dark. We're in the back room of the house, and my brother's acting strange. He's clinging to my mom and won't talk or look around. The phone rings, so I answer. Hello? No reply. Then my brother says, Mom, what are they doing here? And points to the door that leads to the dark garage. The phone rings again, and this time my mom answers. Still no reply. At this point, my brother begins sobbing and begging us to make the scary people leave. The phone won't stop ringing. As soon as we would hang it up, it would ring again. And again, no one would be on the line. Eventually, we unplugged the phone and went to the front room, where we sat by the door and read Bible stories until my aunt returned. My mom had been having awful things happen to her as well. She would have doors open, lights turn on and off, stomping noises, ringing the doorbell. She told me about an awful dream she had of our cousin that had just hung himself. She said she saw him in the dream and his head was low. She approached him and he spun around and grabbed a hold of her. She said that his eyes were red and evil, and he was screaming that he was going to kill me. One day, she made a cup of coffee and turned around to get the creamer. She heard a loud slam that shook the entire house. As she turned around, her coffee cup had been slammed off the counter, and the coffee exploded out of it onto the walls, the counters, the cabinets, everything. After this, I began talking to my mom about my experiences. She informed me that the man who lived in the home before us had shot himself in our dining room. Great. Now, the most recent and terrifying experience happened when I was a junior in high school. My favorite sport was baseball, so right outside of my upstairs bedroom, my mom had 3 pictures of my brother, my sister, and I, each playing baseball. My picture was when I was in the coach's pit, and it showed me mid-swing. One night, I had my best friend and his girlfriend over. They were going to have a movie night with me and my girlfriend. We decided on some creepy new Rob Zombie movie called Witches of Salem. I thought it would be an eerie movie because Rob is a pretty twisted dude. Boy, was I right. From what I remember, the movie was all about occult stuff and possessions. The movie had a lot of really weird special effects that were enticing. It was almost like an LSD trip with all the swirls and color sensations. I remember thinking that they were trying to hypnotize whoever watched the movie. The movie came to an end and it was time to take our ladies home. When I got back to my house, my mom was kind of frantic, and I asked her what was wrong. She said that moments after I left, they heard a bang upstairs that shook the entire house. They described it as sounding like a dresser tipped over. My parents assumed it was me, but when they found out I had left, they went upstairs to investigate. My baseball picture was shattered, laying on the ground in front of my brother's room, which is about 15 feet down the hallway from mine. Now this picture hangs 4 to 5 feet off the ground and the hallway is carpeted. There is no way for that cheap picture frame to make the bang they described on our carpet, then fly 15 feet down the hallway. The glass in the frame of the picture was shattered, and after seeing the photo itself, I turned cold. There was a jagged tear in my picture, right through my body. On top of that, there were these little tiny holes in the photo. Imagine taking a safety pin and poking the tiniest 1 millimeter hole. These holes ran all the way across my picture, evenly punched, evenly spaced, in an absolutely perfect straight line. No human could have done that. Mom bought a new frame and rehung the same photo. When we awoke the next morning, again, it was off the wall, about 15 feet down the hall in front of my brother's room. My mom put double-sided tape on the back of the frame and had it fixed on the wall with both a nail and tape. The next day, the picture flew off the wall, but this time it flew in the opposite direction. It was laying in our upstairs bathroom on the other side of the toilet. This was the final straw for my mom. She made a copy of the photo, but she burned the original. She rehung the copied photo and opened Bibles all around the house. Since then, the picture hasn't fallen off. Now I'm 22 years old and just bought my first house in April of this year. Settling in has been great, although the past 2 weeks I've had an uneasy feeling. It feels like I'm not alone, and I see things in the corner of my eye. Things go missing a lot, only to turn up in a place that I've checked 100 times. I'm starting to get a little uneasy again, like things are going to start back up. I think that's why I've been lurking around subreddits, reading paranormal stories. I guess I just want to be amongst people who know what it's like. I also found out something interesting about my mom's past that could explain the beginning of our haunting. When my mother was in high school, she played around with a Ouija board with her sister, her friend, and her cousin. They had some activity through the board, and the spirit was polite at first, answering questions that nobody could ever know the answer to. Then the spirit turned mean and began to swear at them and say awful things. Before they ended, it told my mom's cousin Tom that he was going to die the following Friday. They were spooked, but chalked it up as just a board to ease their mind. Tom was worried sick all week. Sure enough, after the Friday night football game, Tom was driving home and he was killed in a car accident. My mom has had persistent issues with the paranormal ever since.
When I was 14, my family and some of our friends went to the myrtle plantation in St. Francisville. That was a terrifying experience. When we got there, I felt like this shroud engulfed me. Before our tour, we were walking around, and I heard, "Where's Cornelia?" and just thought it was my mum's friend asking about her kid. And maybe I heard her wrong. Her kid's name was Cameron, but when I asked her husband where she was, he said she went to the bathroom inside. When the tour began, I kept feeling distracted like I was dreaming. I was barely listening until our tour guide told us about the owners and the slaves that killed her master's family by accident. Chloe wanted to give her mistress and her children food poisoning and accidentally killed them. One of their children's names was Cornelia, and they were buried where I had heard the voice. I had to ask the tour guide twice before I could believe it. Then towards the end of the tour we were taken to the trees in front of the house, where they hung slaves. I remember walking to the tree line and suddenly feeling as if no one was with me, and I saw flashes of people hanging there, and I heard weeping. I almost passed out and told my mum I needed to sit down, so she walked with me to a bench near the house. When she asked me what was wrong, I told her and began to cry. That evening we all went to this Mexican restaurant. I couldn't eat because the food was making my mouth hurt like I had an ulcer, and I went to the restroom to find 2 sores in my mouth. Then that night at the hotel room, I woke up to the feeling of someone watching me, and I see this black shadow figure near the foot of the bed. I had to turn on the bathroom light just to go back to sleep. After the tour, they allow you to go around and take pictures of the outside of the house. The only photos they allow of the inside are of this mirror that supposedly the souls of the mistress and her children are stuck in. My mum took a ton of pictures on the outside, and we didn't look through them until we got home. We actually captured something in the photo. My mum didn't notice it, but when I looked I found her, Chloe, the slave that accidentally killed her mistress and the children. She was standing behind my mum in the picture. My mum had taken a close photo of the window trying to get a photo of the inside of the house, and you can clearly see my mum's reflection. And then standing behind her, a figure wearing a turban on her head and period clothing. She had no face. My mum had taken 4 photos of the window. In the first you can see my brother standing behind my mum and the chairs on the porch. The second is the same. The third is the one with her standing behind my mum. And the fourth is the same as the first 2. It freaked me the hell out. My mum also took a few of the mirror as well. In the reflection you can see all of us, my sister and her friends up front, both with white shirts. But in the reflection there are also 3 black orbs. You can see them clearly because of my sister and her friend's shirts. A large orb and 2 smaller ones. For weeks, I felt like I've been watched by something. Even when I talk about it now, I'm feeling like I'm reliving it. That strange, dreamlike feeling, and my throat is closing up. The myrtle plantation is one of the most haunted in Louisiana. I visited a number of them, but have never felt as scared as I have there.
I've had a fair share of paranormal situations in my life, but none more than I did after I had my 2 daughters. Living in Malaysia, or Southeast Asia for that matter, we're no strangers to the paranormal and random ghosts and sightings, along with all the other things that go bump in the night. I used to be very scared of these things, most probably due to the abundance of locally produced horror movies that just stick with you all the time. But somehow I grew out of the horror and kind of just embraced it and brushed it off any time it happened. My wife is pretty much a scaredy cat still, so being in a house full of females, I'm often asked to step up to the plate anytime something abnormal or paranormal occurs. So we had our first daughter back in 2010. She's already 9 years old this year, has completely forgotten whatever she saw when she was little. I'll call her Elle. And our second daughter was born 2 years later, still has some kind of memory of the things still, and we'll call her Kay. We stayed at my in-laws' place after we got married and right up until just before Kay was born, so our time with Elle was very much focused and had a lot of outings together, just the 3 of us. There was one time that we did a staycation at a posh hotel in town, and just before bedtime, Elle points to the window and says, "Kakak, kakak," which means girl or lady or auntie in Malay. We were pretty high up on one of the top floors, so you can imagine what we felt. I just closed the curtains and told Elle to go to sleep. You know how they say kids can see ghosts? I really do believe that. Anyway, after Kay was born, we moved into our own place. It was just a random house in the same neighborhood as my in-laws, and we loved the place. But it did have a slight creepiness to it, which I just couldn't explain. We caught Elle talking and playing all by herself numerous times as if somebody was there with her, and she started to have an imaginary friend that we'll call Alice. It was pretty weird, as she was barely 2 years old, and we didn't recall her being exposed to such a name before, unless someone literally told it to her. There would be times that she would scold me for sitting on Alice, and she'd say, "Why is Alice sitting on our front gate?" or "Alice is on the tree." It happened quite frequently, and I started to find it humorous. My wife was not impressed, and called for someone to come have a look at our house. He came and said that our house was actually a pit stop of sorts for traveling entities, like jinns and banshees. He pointed out locations throughout the house which these things liked to park, and one of them was on our roof, where there was, as he put it, a nest. He helped to remove it somehow, and he said not to worry, as they won't make our house a pit stop anymore. The next day, I was working late, and my wife was home with the girls. It was probably 9 p.m.-ish when she suddenly heard a loud grunt or an angry exclamation by a lady's voice on the ceiling. You know the type when you can't even form words and you just shout? My wife wasn't immediately shocked or scared until Elle said, "What's that, Mummy?" To which it hit her that it wasn't her ears playing games, and that it was a genuine sound. She called me and told me what happened. She said, "Someone's on our roof." And I remembered straight away what the guy did the day before, which was to remove the pit stop. So I called him and told him. He just said, "Yeah, they're pissed because of the pit stop being gone, but they won't bother the house anymore after tonight." And he was right. No more occurrences after that. Elle was pretty sad. She kept asking why Alice never visited her anymore, and when she does, she'll just see her on a tree outside our house, just looking but not coming in. It seems when the guy came to clean our house, he put a sort of protection layer as well around, preventing bad things from entering the house. So that pretty much explains why Alice never visits anymore. Elle loves to draw on her whiteboard that we had for her, and one day she drew something which, to me, looked like the Cookie Monster in Sesame Street. I asked her, "What's that?" And she goes, "Oh, that's Alice, Daddy." I had instant chills. A few years later, we moved to a different house to rent, and this was a bit worse than the first house. Elle was already 5 by now, and the sightings had slowly weaned off. And now Kay was starting to see things. The house itself had been empty for years before we moved in, and we were happy with it because it was right in front of a playground. The neighbors were nice too, and my landlord was a pious old man who was nice to us as well. He did some minor renovations of the house just before we moved in. "Doing it for you guys," were his exact words. But the house had a dark feel to it, and at first we felt it was cozy, but we were dead wrong. The first occurrence was one night when I returned home and saw from outside the house that our kitchen light was on. The front of the house had large sliding glass doors, and we just used a sheer curtain, so anybody outside could definitely see the inside if the lights were on. And that space stretched all the way back to the kitchen, so you could see right up till there. It was probably close to midnight, and I was wondering what my wife was still doing in the kitchen at this hour. I didn't go in yet, when suddenly I saw shadows move very quickly from the kitchen going upstairs. I just thought, the girls are going to prank me like they always do. So I went in, locked up, and went up to the bedroom. We all sleep in the master bedroom. I switched on the room lights. Kind of like, aha, gotcha. But my wife and daughters were fast asleep, like at least for 1 to 2 hours already. No sign of if they'd just gotten into bed or anything like that. They were genuinely already in a deep slumber. They didn't even wake up when I flipped the light on. I told my wife the next morning, and she said that they had been playing that night and everyone was just so tired that they turned in really early. So, yeah. Coming back to Kay, she was a brave little girl and was about 3 years old at this time. She could play alone in her room for hours, go up and down the house alone, didn't mind anything. One day, we were downstairs watching TV and Kay was alone upstairs. Suddenly, she rushed down the stairs and sat next to me, her eyes locked at the top of the stairs. I didn't realize this yet until my wife asked her what was wrong. She just kept quiet and still and looked up the stairs. Clearly something had happened, so I just went up, just to check. Nothing out of the ordinary. Went back down, brushed it off, and we watched TV together until bedtime. A few days later, I was going through one of the children's books with Kay, looking at random pictures, when we came across a drawing of a kid wearing a bedsheet with cutout holes for eyes. Yeah, the typical ghost image in cartoons. And Kay told me, "I saw this." I asked her where and when. She said, "In the room the other day." And after some further probing questions, the story went that she was playing alone when we were all downstairs, and this thing just came through the window and said hello to her. Apparently it had a family, because there was a bigger daddy and a bigger mummy too, and they all lived in the ceiling. Yeah, that was definitely a WTF moment for me. Kay told me that they all looked like that, and that the daddy had come to the room too, and asked to shake her hand. She got frightened and ran downstairs. Sounds all friendly, but recalling the shock on her face, it must have been pretty scary for her, especially being the brave girl that I know she is. We kinda didn't call the same guy to come cleanse the house. I don't know why, and we just decided to wing it. We stayed there for a whole year before moving out again, and there were a few other occurrences involving Kay throughout. Sometimes she would look out the window to the playground out front and point to something, or one of the swings would just be swinging by itself, but the others were still. Also, my wife and I were almost constantly arguing all the time, sometimes even for the most trivial of matters, which looking back seems really odd because that's not who we are. So on the day that we're moving, while packing stuff into the transport, our neighbors came to say goodbye. These guys lived right next door, and we shared the same wall next to each other. Out of the blue, he randomly asks, "I'm very sorry, but, do you run some kind of production at night?" No," I said. We always hear, rails every night at about 3 a.m. It kind of sounds like trolleys moving back and forth." I said, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, every night. We didn't want to ask. We thought you were running some kind of production activity in the house." So yeah, apparently this had been going on every night since we had moved in, and they were already immune to it, oh, there they go again with their 3 a.m. activities. This completely flabbergasted me. I told them, "We don't even own any trolleys." A few years later, after we'd moved out, the other next-door neighbor sent me a random message on Facebook. She asked, "Hey, I'm just checking in. Did you guys always used to do your house cleaning at 3 a.m. every night?" I said, "Hell no, why would I do that?" She said, "Yeah, 'cause every night if I woke up to use the toilet, I'd always hear you guys cleaning the house, really intensively," which I kind of thought, well, these guys are sure efficient. That was until we vacated the house, and the sounds could still be heard almost every other night. Someone cleaning the house, and that's when she decided to drop me a message. Anyway, we finally moved to our current house, and the girls haven't had any sightings. My wife and I don't quarrel as much, and things just felt a lot better. Sounds maybe cliche or nonsensical, but a house does really have a soul which you can feel. It's something that influences your decisions and also your emotional states from day to day. Some houses can really have a bad negative aura, and others have a more positive outlook. We're just lucky that all the houses we've lived in were rentals. It could have been a nightmare if we'd bought the place and it turned out the way it did, having us go through the hassles of deciding to sell or keep. The other day, I asked Kay to help me get something in the room. She got up, walked to the room, and then froze. She came back and said, "No, you go and take it." I asked why. She said that she saw a hand come out of the room and wave at her. Here we go again.
So, I'm pretty sure I accidentally invited something into my house. I named it The Aula, after the short story by Guy de Maupassant, where a guy does the same. It started when I lost my keys. A bunch of us were at a friend's house in a small village outside of town. They were in a band together, and I was their default roadie / tag-along, and we performed at the local venue that evening. Since his house was closest to the place, we stayed over there. We were probably about 18 to 19 years old at the time, and we were a rowdy bunch. So when our friend's mum, whose house it was, asked us to steal a roll-up carpet that she liked the look of from a garage down the street, we were up for it. The great carpet robbery went off without a hitch, right up until we were jogging back up the hill to the house with this thing on our shoulders. That was when the button on my trousers broke and my trousers fell. I tripped over them and the contents of my pockets went flying into the night. I found my wallet and phone, but my keys were nowhere to be seen, and I was fearful that an extended search might lead to us getting caught, so I had to give them up as lost forever on some country road in the middle of nowhere. 2 weeks later, I was reading in bed when I heard them fall. I had a half-attic conversion, which was a pretty big space. The rest of the floor was taken up by a spare room with a little storage space left over in the ceiling above it. There was no furniture in the middle of my room for the keys to have fallen from, let alone a way for them to have been there, since I lost them about 12 miles away in the aforementioned middle of nowhere. Yet there they were, right in the middle of my carpet, and I heard them land there. After this, strange things started to happen around the house. I'd hear things in the spare room next to me, like someone moving around, but there'd be no one there when I'd check. I'd wake up to find my empty glasses beside the bed, despite being certain I hadn't drunk any of it, and my computer would randomly turn itself on in the night, waking me up with a sudden whir of its fan. One morning I was awoken by some baby birds tweeting loudly somewhere in my ceiling. I had noticed a bird coming and going outside my window, and it had obviously found a way into the space between my ceiling and the outside tiles of the roof. Just as I was contemplating how the hell I was going to deal with this, there was a loud, honest-to-God snarl and an equally loud bang on the roof. The tweeting stopped instantly, and I never heard it again. The snarl was like a dog or something, full-throated and furious. The bang was like someone slamming a fist onto a table. Another instance happened while I was at work on a Saturday morning. There was no one in the house save my girlfriend, who was having a lie-in. She was on her side facing away from the bedroom door, when something sat on the other side of the bed. She felt the mattress go down with the weight of whatever it was, and she froze. She didn't dare move or open her eyes. After a minute or two, the weight lifted, and she was gone. When she eventually got the courage to look around, there was no one there. She was so freaked out she rang me at work to tell me about it, and then left the house to spend the day in town until I got home. So yeah, I accidentally gave some entity keys to my place, and it took that as an invitation, and moved into my spare room. It hasn't done anything hostile so far. In fact, an argument could be made that it's trying to be helpful, but nonetheless, still freaky as hell.
So to start, a little backstory. My husband and I lived in a big city in a teeny tiny house, around 500 square feet. We were planning our wedding and starting a family soon, so we couldn't stay there anymore. Well, I couldn't. He was okay with it. We had dreams of moving out into the country, and we found such an amazing deal on 320 acres that we had to check it out. We emailed the realtor, and she said that the lady living there wasn't quite ready to show the house yet. She really didn't want to sell, so she wasn't sure when she could show it. We asked that we could come and see the land, and the house would be fine until we could build our dream home further away from the highway. So we go, as excited as ever. We pull up and get out of our truck. All you could hear were birds and the wind. It was so peaceful and quiet in comparison to city life. We knew this was our home. Realtor arrived, and the owner wasn't home, so she showed us the house. It was 1,300 square feet, so it felt like a mansion to us. The lady who owned it was 80-some years old and lived on the property alone. Her children wanted her to move closer to them for fear something could happen to her. She always would go out into the field on her quad, which wasn't trusty at all, or in her beat-up old van. So inside her house, there were these pictures of saints everywhere. She was Haitian, and I got the voodoo vibe, but not at all in a negative way. So we go explore the outbuildings. One of them has a chair, a ton of burnt-out candles, and some knives. More voodoo vibes, but again, not negative. It's a religion, and I'm not one to judge what people believe. We ended up meeting the lady, and she took us out on her quad to see the land. It stalled a few times. She was really fun, upbeat. She also seemed to like me and my husband. So we made an offer, and we got the house. We had a bunch of friends help us move in November 2016. I burnt sage in the house because that's just something I do. I never got any negative vibes there, but just to clear it out for our belongings. I had a friend with me, and she said she saw a shadow move, so she also went over the house again with sage just to be safe. We do know someone died on the property, cutting down trees, so it was good to be on the safe side. Another friend got super creepy vibes that night. They stayed on the main level bedroom, and she said that the entire night it felt like someone was watching her. On the main level in the original house, there's the bedroom, kitchen, living room, and an oversized pantry. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs. There was an addition on the main level. It had the dish pit, aka the sink, and cupboards, but not enough room for a table, and the bathroom and its own little cellar basement. The original basement looks something out of a dungeon with giant boulders, and it's unfinished. The pillars holding up the beams are trees rather than 4x4s. It's very rustic, and I love it. But it can give off weird vibes. I'm no stranger to ghosts, as I grew up in a haunted house, but that's another story for another day. My husband, on the other hand, has always been a skeptic. The beat-up, falling-apart barn always creeped me out. I never liked it, and I would just avoid it. Half of the roof was caving in. It looked a little like a scene from a horror movie. It even creeped out my husband. He felt like something was always going to jump out at him when he was fixing things in there. Anyway, on to the paranormal bits. It all started when I was walking into the living room and passed by the basement stairs. I saw a black dog, almost pit bull-shaped, sitting at the bottom of the stairs with red eyes. I did a double take and it wasn't there. I went into the basement thinking it was our big dog. He's a Mastiff, Rottweiler, Shepherd, Lab cross, but he wasn't there. He was in the dish pit. So I tell my husband and shake it off. I feel uneasy about it, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. The next event was that I had a miscarriage. I'm not sure how long after this, maybe a few months, so I was in a pretty dark place. We also had a falling out with a close friend that ended up being pretty messy, and some huge negative family drama with an in-law. The in-laws are verbally abusive, manipulative, etc. At least this one was. A few months later, the husband asked to work a job overnight in another province. First night by myself in the house. It was creepy. I felt so uneasy the entire night. I was so thankful he was only gone the one night. Felt like I wasn't alone. My dogs were a little on edge. It was super windy and stormy out. It was a perfect scene for a horror movie. So I went to bed early and slept it away. Carry on again, I'm pregnant once more. Our baby boy was growing wonderfully. Our 2 old dogs, Japanese chins, had some crazy dental work done, and they were not happy campers, so they were up all night. My pregnant self was tired and cranky, so I took my Yorkie Poo to the main level guest bed to sleep. She was pretty restless. She kept looking into a corner of the room and then moving to different parts of the bed trying to get comfortable, always to sit up and look at that corner. This is the same bedroom my friend had negative vibes from. So out of nowhere, my Yorkie Poo starts growling at the corner of the room. So we noped out of there pretty quick and suffered a sleepless night with our recovering dogs. It was super dark and you couldn't see anything in the room. Then we had a music festival on our property in June. It was fun and related to this in the future. My lovely baby boy decided to be a breech baby and kick my nerves all the time to the point where I couldn't walk. So I started maternity leave early at 36 weeks, due end of July 2018. So I'm home all day now. The house felt so different than just being home on evenings and weekends. It felt like a heaviness. I couldn't go into the basement if it was dark out, only in the daytime. I just got this feeling that something bad would happen if I did. I constantly felt like I was being watched. If the small dogs were in our bedroom, the Yorkie Poo would bark and growl at anyone coming up the stairs, which was a new behavior for her. And this is when I started getting feelings like I would be followed up the stairs. Our baby boy is born, and he's a night owl, so I'm up a lot in the night, which isn't normal for me. Our top floor is 3/4 story, so there's storage space where the walls are because of that corner angle of the roof. And in baby boy's bedroom, there's an opening with no door. I feed him in his room so as not to disturb the husband as he's still going to work. It feels like something is watching and waiting in there. I would avoid looking at it because I felt like if I did, I would see glowing eyes or something worse. Even just walking the hallway between bedrooms is very uncomfortable during those nighttime feedings. I ended up starting to see these shadows following me, which was creepy, and it defied all science. I always tried to debunk things I saw so that I wouldn't work myself into a frenzy. These shadows were also so large. They'd be as tall as the ceiling, which is 10 feet, and they were disproportionate looking. I would try to recreate the shadows with my steps, but I never could. As for the feelings, I always tried to make myself believe that it was in my head, just an overactive imagination. Sometimes knocking would come from the basement, especially when the internet wasn't working and our modem and router were in the basement. That would be awful because I had to work up a lot of nerve to go fix the internet, as it was my lifeline without cable. We moved the guest bed into the basement. I was going to sleep there one night so I could catch up, and my husband was going to feed the baby boy at night. So I settle up in the basement and get all comfy, cozy, and excited for a full night's sleep. I turn off the lights, and there's this green light on the ceiling. It's fading in and out slightly, but in no regular pattern, so I'm thinking it's a reflection on the ducts or something. I turn on the lights, and it's solid wood where the green light was. Also, there isn't any green light around to cause such a reflection. I noped out of there and went into our travel trailer on a cold fall night. We had another festival in September. Ended up talking to someone that was there in June, so they're asking me about my other big black dog. And I'm like, there's just the one. And they're dead serious that they saw this big pit bull-like dog in the field at both festivals. So this kind of made me feel like I wasn't going crazy and reassured me that what I was experiencing was real. but then it made me realize I'm not going crazy and this is happening, and it's pretty terrifying. When husband is at work, I'm very isolated. Our closest neighbor is a mile away. All our family lives over an hour's drive away. So I'm a little freaked out with everything going on. I'm talking to local friends and city friends. I get in touch with a medium. She got me to text her a photo of our house. She says the land is bad, and that the house is bad, and that the dog is possibly a demon. She offered to come help me salt the house for gas money. She never charged me anything. She never told me why the land is bad, and to this day I'm still very curious. So I ended up getting a local church group to come pray through the house. It didn't really do anything, but they told me some crazy stories of other houses they had blessed, so the area itself was pretty haunted. So I'm super unhappy still because my husband is about to leave for 8 weeks. I don't want my son growing up in a haunted house like I did. I'm also so uncomfortable in the home, and I'm about to be alone with our little guy for 2 months. Someone gets me in touch with a shaman. He comes and he does his thing. It was really cool to watch. So he finishes up and tells me what he found. Lots of shadow people in that hideaway space upstairs, at the top of the stairs and the bottom, basically everywhere where I felt like I was being watched. Apparently shadow people feed on negative thoughts. Also, I never explained specifics to him, so it was neat that his findings matched my experiences exactly. The shadow people weren't feeding off me, but rather my husband. But I'm super sensitive, so I was getting all the bad vibes. The dog was, as he said, 80% gone, and if it wasn't, he would come back. He said the barn was awful, and that our best bet was to just burn it. He set up a crystal grid around the property to protect us in the future from negative spirits. We talked about some of my past experiences. I have so many. And the previous owner. I feel as though her voodoo was protecting her from what we were experiencing. The shaman was lovely. He gave me some blue corn for storing some of my crystals, and gave me suggestions on how to help keep my sensitivities at bay. The shaman leaves. The husband comes home, and he says the house feels lighter. He couldn't believe it. Fast forward a few more months. I'm watching Netflix with little baby sleeping in my arms. My husband walks in and says, "I saw something." So that was a little vague, so I pry a bit. He thought one of our little Japanese chins went into the bathroom. It was a white and small thing that went in there. Our chins are black and white, so he follows, and the bathroom door was closed. He's so baffled, being the skeptic that he is. So I text the shaman. He says he'll do his thing and get back to me. When he does, he said it was one of our guardians. Sometimes I feel things move through the house, but it's nothing like what we used to experience. No more shadows, no phantom dogs. I can go into the basement at night now. I don't like going down there at night because it's still a little creepy, but I can. My husband isn't so skeptical anymore, but it was a wild ride from moving in to over 2 years later. At least for now, all is calm in the home. Hey guys, Raven Reads here. Thank you so much for watching this video and listening to tonight's stories. I hope you enjoyed listening to them. I certainly enjoyed narrating my share. A big thank you to Mortis Media for inviting me back to the channel. I always enjoy working with Mort and reading stories for all of you. If you liked my narration and you'd like to hear more of it, you can follow the link in the description and subscribe to my channel. I read true scary stories, narrate classic horror novels, and original short fiction. I discuss supernatural and paranormal topics and generally post content about all things weird, supernatural, and macabre. I also share horror artwork and design from time to time. We're a low-key group of horror junkies, and we're always happy to make room for some new faces. I do hope to see you over on my channel. Subscribe and you'll become an official lovely listener and a member of the Conspiracy of Ravens. We meet several times a week to take dark and twisted journeys into the night, and we'd love to have you along. Before you do, be sure to subscribe to Mortis Media if you haven't already, and toll the bell to summon spooky stories each night. It would be a shame to miss any opportunity to let the darkness take control. Thanks again to Mort for inviting me to the channel, and I hope to see you over on my channel soon. Bye for now.